Hi, this is Dr. Darshan Shah of Next Health. I'm here with Tero of Four Sigmatic. It's so honored to have you here as a guest, and also with Kevin Peak, the president of Next Health. And we're going to talk about all things biohacking, mushrooms, and find out about your extremely interesting life. You're like one of the most interesting guys in the world.
Really? I don't know about that. Yeah.
I think so.
Maybe in the biohacking world, not to the rest of us. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
And thanks for creating something awesome. I was just on the way driving here, and I talked with a friend who was a long-term health fanatic, but in Europe, and it's like, oh, I'm going to do this thing, and is this place Next Health? And I try to explain what you guys are. And I was like, imagine all the stuff we used to geek out in one place. And it's a place where you can take your mom and dad. It's not like spooky. A lot of the other health clinics, alternative health clinics, were like, I don't know what's this about.
Yeah.
So thanks for creating this in such a central place like LA.
Well, thank you. Well, we appreciate you being on here. And, we learn so much from these podcasts. And I'm so excited to learn about you and kind of your base of knowledge that you have. You have tremendous base of knowledge in biohacking and in health space. So
sure.
I'd love to get started just to hear a little bit more about just you personally. Where are you from and how did you get to mushrooms?
Yeah. So I'm a 13th generation farmer and a mushroom enthusiast from Finland. And I grew up on our family farm. My mom taught physiology and anatomy, so I had the science side of it. But she also took me and my brother out foraging when we were kids, not just mushrooms, but also berries, shoots, leaves, whatever you could find there in Finland. And my dad was a farmer, and I learned a lot about the soil and agriculture from him and from nutrition from my mom. And then my great-grandfather helped to found like a foraging school. So my elementary school was part of the normal, on top of the normal education, we learned about foraging plants. And that's where my affinity to natural things came from, and valuing the elements. And then I studied chemistry first and then nutrition later. And I started coaching pro athletes, models, whatnot in nutrition about 14 years ago. And that's when I realized very quickly is that the conventional wisdom that I learned in nutrition of just focusing on macronutrients or at best micronutrients was just like tip of the iceberg. And there's so many other elements in hormonal balance, digestive health, immune function that just go way deeper than just what's your percentage of protein or animal protein, no animal protein. Right. Like there was so many other levels. And, sure. And that's how I slowly sucked into the world that is now today called biohacking, quantified, so whatever you want to call it. But back then it was just like the next frontier of health fanatics. And,
right.
And there was many pockets from hardcore raw food vegans to then like athletes that were like bodybuilders optimizing for certain nutrients and everything in between. So,
wow, that's interesting.
What got you on the path with mushrooms specifically? When you say that you're 13th generation farmer, how far back did mushrooms go into that equation?
From the beginning.
Wow. So it's in your lineage.
Yeah.
Really?
So I learned the forage from my mom. I was yay high. I don't even know. That was one of my first memories, was actually walking in the forest, picking up bilberries, which I like, those low bush wild blueberries. Yeah. And I love berries, but mushrooms were always so like fascinatingly mystical. And my dad, who was my hero, or is my hero, loved mushroom soup and mushroom sauces. And I was like, wow, they're really crazy, those. And then as part of foraging, it was like obviously one element of foraging. So I learned about that. And then super randomly, almost as a joke, me and my friend won an innovation contest about 14 years ago by discovering a rare mushroom that literally started out as a joke, but then ended up being a reality. And the government or this institution, public institution, awarded us with this innovation award for discovering this like culinary mushroom. But I was never into serving the 1% of the 1%, because the mushroom it's a high culinary prize that you would have in like Michelin star restaurants. Mm-hmm. And my passion was always like optimal human performance. And it was not only until like a few years after that when I discovered initially cordyceps mushroom. I was running competitively ultra runs and whatever, and I was looking at ways to like improve and get an edge in a race. Mm-hmm. And I was going into all these different things, a lot of the stuff that you guys here serve. And I was like, wow. Then I found this mushroom, and I was like, then that went like full circle from basically from my childhood learnings into what I learned in nutrition to kind of find these functional mushrooms, which is just the one segment, small segment of all the mushrooms in the world, but they're the ones that often like help with things like cognitive function, immune function, adaptogenic properties or whatnot. So
only 1% of mushrooms are the helpful mushrooms?
Oh, even less, actually.
Really?
Like a small fraction. So nobody really knows how many mushrooms there are. The estimates are that there's about 1.5 million varieties of mushrooms. And, just to give context there, it's 6 times more than there would be plants. So for every tomato, there would be 6 different kind of mushrooms. For every broccoli, there would be 6 different mushrooms.
Wow.
And so far, there's about 400 of these functional mushrooms. So it's much less than 1%. So,
And the mushrooms that you buy at the store, those are not functional mushrooms.
very few of them. Shiitake would be like a crossover between a culinary and a functional mushroom. Maybe maitake, but yeah, mostly like the culinary mushrooms are a solid source of alternative protein. It's not a great source, but it's an alternative source. They have fiber. Some have vitamin D and B vitamins. So it's not that the culinary mushrooms are bad, but to kind of limit it, they're like an alternative to a lot of stuff. Whereas these functional mushrooms, besides maybe vitamin D and fiber and whatnot, they also have different, for example, immunomodulatory benefits that you can really kind of serve much beyond just protein in your bodily function and support elements of the physiology that are more valuable than just pure calories.
Wow. Go ahead.
And of those, what percentage are the hallucinogenic ones?
Well, those are
Fun ones.
completely separate, and we can surely talk about that. So, again, nobody knows how many mushrooms there are.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, there's 2 kinds of psychedelic mushrooms that are quite distinctly different. One is the psilocybin family. There's many, many varieties, multiple dozens of different types of psilocybin mushrooms. And those are the fun mushrooms that most people react. But they're also illegal in the United States, at least so far. There's a couple of states that are pushing for the legalization of those same that happen with marijuana. And then there's the Amanita family, which is a more poisonous family, but there's also one halogenic property there, which is legal everywhere but Tennessee. But that is not something I can recommend to anybody listening. So,
Because you said poisonous as well.
yeah, that one, the psychedelic variety Amanita muscaria is not lethal, but it is poisonous. So you will feel a little ill while having it, while having the possibly psychoactive properties. But its cousins are some of the most lethal mushrooms in the world. So if you pick the wrong mushroom, that's probably one of the mushrooms that will also kill you.
Oh, that's scary. What about truffles?
Truffles are a great culinary treat.
Culinary, right?
Yeah, morels, great culinary treat, chanterelles.
Yes.
Then we get to kind of the crossover. Maybe porcini there was a study from the University of Pennsylvania, from the mycological department. They tested a lot of whole foods. Obviously, it was a small spread. They couldn't test all the whole foods in the world. But everything they tested, the highest source of glutathione, the highest source of antioxidants was porcini mushrooms. So from all the whole food sources, I know you guys, you're big on glutathione.
Sure.
So mushrooms can be a huge source of antioxidants, various antioxidant varieties. And we can go deeper into that for specific. You guys are so advanced on it that one antioxidant is not the same as another antioxidant.
Absolutely.
There's functional differences and efficacy differences between different antioxidants for different purposes.
Right. And, you can get antioxidants in your diet
For sure.
on a daily basis. It's totally additive to coming here and getting glutathione injected into your veins.
Yeah.
And different antioxidants do different things.
Oh, for sure.
Especially the natural ones.
And how I like to look at it is like, I love IVs. We talked with you before as the value of the absorption is just so different than I'm not as big on ingesting supplements. That's just me, but the IV is just so amazing. Yeah. But if you come and do a glutathione here, it's like a high intensity workout versus eating different colorful vegetables every day is more like walking as a form of exercise. That it's something like baseline that you should do on an ongoing basis, and then every now and then kind of like boost the system. Yeah. So that's how I look at it.
Amazing. What I really love about your upbringing is that you're out there foraging wild plants and food, and you're out there in nature and eating all these wild plants, which I don't think we get anymore in our day-to-day diet. Like everything has come from a farm, right?
For sure.
And do you think that's contributed a lot to sickness and the lack of nutrition in our society now?
Sure. You're a doctor, I'm not. I can't comment on illnesses directly, but I do believe that a lot of nutritional deficiencies are partly because we've almost completely reduced wild foods from our diet. Very few people consume anything that would be wild. And there's studies on different kind of, for example, dark leafy greens, how wild varieties have more micronutrients than cultivated ones. Right. There are ways to do it though. For example, sea veggies, different kinds of kelp and other things that are still wild food that you can get in most grocery stores. And even on dark leafy greens, you can go to more or less processed varieties. So have the dandelion and the arugula versus the iceberg lettuce. So there's ways to kind of do that. But yes, you're right. And there's less and less of wild foods. And what I think is the most fascinating part, if you ever end up in the forest hungry and you try to find food, two things you find out. A, there isn't that many calories out there.
Right.
Two, there's a lot of nutrients out there. And I think our diet is probably the opposite. There's a lot of calories out there. There ain't that many nutrients out there. So I think it's kind of reversed. We've reversed the system. We have excess of calories, limited amount of high quality micronutrients and vitamins. But if you pick up really wild edibles, you don't need to eat a lot. And you're like, ooh, that nettle. That nettle has a lot of kick to it. Yeah.
That's such a great point. I mean, that's so true. And, going back to the sickness thing, when we switched to farming and then switched to eating high caloric foods just to maintain, the population, that's when sickness really started. And our ancestral, forebrothers, they didn't have access to so many calories. It was mostly nutrition that they were taking in, and they were able to live a healthier life for longer.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously, we sit more now, we're less active physically. There's less community that we used to have such tight like tribes and villages that help together. Now we live in little boxes in high rises. And there's other factors I think that probably impacts. We also live a lot longer. So certain illnesses kind of hit us on an older age, but surely the calories versus nutritional density has pretty much gone upside down in the last some hundreds of years, especially.
Yeah. So what is with Four Sigmatic? I'd love to hear the story of that a bit, because I think it's fascinating what's happened with it's kind of a mushroom revolution that's happening over the last couple of years. There's just so much more awareness around it, at least here in LA. Maybe it's not everywhere, but I see it pretty readily. And it seems like you guys are really leading the charge with Four Sigmatic. How did that come about, to taking it from foraging to having this, mass market consumer goods product? And where do you see this going in the future?
Yeah, I've had a lot of access to the health and wellness industry early on, but honestly, I didn't believe I could change it, if I'm completely honest. Like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I felt like I was powerless against the Danone and Nestle and Pepsi and Cokes of the world, or even pharmaceutical companies. Like, what would I, a farm boy from Finland, what could I achieve? And it was not until the blogging started happening and Facebook really started spreading about 10 years ago, and kind of Web 2.0, if you may, where my friends who started creating blogs and sharing alternative health knowledge that was against the food pyramid and the eat a lot of grains type of diet, and started getting traction and started introducing, at that time, somewhat radical ideas like fasting. Or they're not that radical, right? But at that point, they felt radical, and people started discovering it. And I realized that that's the way. What we're doing right now is sharing our own experiences. They're not an absolute truth, but we can put it out online. People who are interested can listen to it for free, can tune in, learn, do their own research, make their own decisions, and that's how information can spread. And probably when they try it on themselves, they're going to tell their friends, right? So that didn't exist that long time ago. Even these smartphones that we carry, it's still such a new thing. iPhone, 2007, 2008. It's not that long time ago. Now we feel like we've always had them. So that inspired it. And I always wanted to focus on things that would have like an 80-20 principle. That's kind of live my life on an 80-20 principle model. And I was looking at what would move the needle the most. And the company Four Sigmatic is a very geeky way of saying that we focus on the 50 most researched foods in the world. So if you take in any sciences, but including natural sciences, if you take a large enough sample size and you compare that sample size against a single variable, it will form a bell curve. And just to make that a little clearer, if that was complicated, you take everybody who lives in LA and you take their height. And you notice that most people are average height. Then there's extreme outliers that are not that tall, and then there's extreme outliers that are very tall, right? And that's just how nature tends to work. And if you take all the foods you can eat in the world and you compare the nutrient density, like how nutrient dense is iceberg lettuce, how nutrient dense is arugula, you'll form that most foods are average. Some foods have little to no nutritional value, and some foods have extreme nutritional value. And I always loved superfoods, but I always thought that name was so whack.
Right.
So Four Sigmatic, so now comes the math part. Every standard deviation from the mean is called sigma in math. So if you go 4 sigmas, there's 50 most researched foods in the world. And out of those 50 most researched foods in the world, maybe 1/3 of them we all know. Coffee, green tea, cinnamon, black pepper, lemon, like stuff that we all know, olive. We just don't value them as much necessarily always, but they're really well studied, super nutrient dense. Then 1/3 is some things that like quite health conscious people would know, like turmeric, maybe ginseng, maca, things like that. And then there's the 1/3 that is, you got to be quite hardcore to know astragalus or know even a while ago, like reishi or chaga mushrooms. A lot of people didn't know. So our goal is just to kind of bring those most researched foods into light in a very accessible way, and internally and externally. So we make things that you can put in your mouth and things you can put on your skin. And that's kind of the mission that we're on. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to educate. You only think that 50 is not that much, but it's actually quite a lot.
Yeah.
And just highlighting that to people is kind of what we're trying to do. And out of those 50, about 10 are mushrooms. So, or 8 to 10, depending how critical you are. So
got it. I always wondered what Four Sigmatic, the name came from. So that totally explains it. I love it how there's a big geeky math explanation to it.
Could be simpler. It would just
I love it though.
Maybe we should have just said it next health. It would have been a lot easier for people to explain. So kudos to you for coming out with a little simpler name.
I like Four Sigmatic a lot. Maybe we'll just trade names.
And just on the amount of research that they're in is in mushrooms, the challenge with a lot of whole foods is that there really isn't research because there is no money to be made. Nobody can own whole foods. So that's a challenge. Luckily, the pharmaceutical industry by accident came across one fungal medicine, which was called penicillin. And that was the total accident. And since then, that has saved a lot of lives in the world. And after that, the pharmaceutical industry really started focusing on fungal research because every pharmaceutical is some sort of isolated part of nature. So they find something in nature, they isolate it, maybe combine it with another thing.
Sure.
And in right now, roughly 10 of the 20 best-selling drugs in the world have fungal component to it. A lot of them are focused on immune system, immunosuppressants and other things. And roughly about 40% of all pharmaceuticals use some sort of mushrooms in them again, a lot of them are immune system related drugs. So
I did not know that. So is the eventual goal of Four Sigmatic to move on from mushrooms into some of these other 50 most researched foods, or are you going to stay focused on the mushroom aspect?
We've always focused on the other stuff. So we make
it.
coffee, tea, kind of matcha, or cacao. Chocolate or cacao is actually one of the most researched foods in the world. We've always used berries. We've kind of used adaptogens like Eleuthero, rhodiola, schisandra. These are things that are on the top 50 that we've used from the get-go. We're just best known for the mushrooms, partly because of our love for it. But yeah, we've always focused on also not just mushrooms, but also other adaptogens and superfoods. But yeah, we have a soft spot for mushrooms particularly, but we don't discriminate. If they're really good for you, we wanna help make it easier and more tasty for people to consume them on a daily basis. Because you guys know the hardest part is compliance, and that's why your membership is so awesome, because it like helps people to have that compliance. A lot of people join a gym in January, and now we're in March, they might not go again. So so how do you keep people on that track? And that's why I love a lot of your program as well. And that's what we try to do is instead of coming out with something crazy, people rarely forget to have their coffee.
Right.
So it might be 100 or 90 degrees in LA, but people still have coffee, or might be whatever the weather is, they will forget, they will remember to put serum or moisturizer on their face if that's part of their routine.
So what do you have a new name if you don't call these foods superfoods? How do you classify what this group of the most powerful foods are?
So superfood is fine. It's like, I don't have a better one. I'm not going to force it. Just the brand is Four Sigmatic. We are a health and wellness company that helps basically nourish the body internally and externally with superfoods. It's not the best name, but let's just go with that. for now, the lack of better name, but they're real foods from real nature that have a lot of nutrient density, and I just don't know what else to call them right now.
Got it.
I love your coffees. I mean, I always have a box of Four Sigmatic coffee in the morning. I take a little packet, put in the cup. How do you drink your coffee? Is it just basically the coffee with water, or do you put some MCT oil? What do you do in the morning?
Yeah, this is a tough one. A lot of people ask, like, what do you have? And I don't know if you guys can relate, but I'm always experimenting. So it's kind of like hard to come up with a one theme. I definitely take breaks from caffeine. Like that's a big part of what I do. Either move to decaf or completely no caffeine in any form, even tea, just to give my brain a little break. And but I do have usually hot beverages in the morning. If I'm fasting, it might be different if I'm not fasting, if I add calories to it. But a few things that I really, really love that I think are helpful to any beverage and tonic, because you have to understand that in herbalism, normally you never have a single ingredient, anything. So same way as you wouldn't have an IV drip probably with one thing, you want to have things that have synergy, same way as beverages. So actually drinking black coffee or black tea alone doesn't really make sense. So let's take an Indian chai, for example. You use fats and milk in it, and then you add these spices that have tons of nutrient density. So I highly recommend anybody to whatever you drink in the morning, somehow incorporate healthy spices. Huge for longevity. It's kind of like, and it's such a low-hanging fruit. Whatever your budget is, whatever your life situation is, adding high-quality spices is super inexpensive, and there's so many potential health benefits to different spices. So just kind of whatever you're drinking in the morning, spices. So I use spice blends. Sometimes I add single spices. Big thing. The other part I do like, and that's a different body type, some sort of fats, and that could be from MCT oil, coconut milk, could be cacao butter blended in, a lot of things. I don't use it a lot. I'm not a bulletproof coffee kind of a guy, but a little bit, and that really it breaks down the bitters. You can put a lot more of bitter herbal things in if you add a little bit of fatty acids, and I feel like it helps with the digestion, especially early on. Your stomach tends to be more sensitive in the morning, as you know, and this kind of helps with the delivery a lot. So spices and fats are definitely something I look to add to most of my morning beverages.
Nice.
And on the spices, what are your top 3 or top couple spices that you go with?
I think spices are kind of like some of the top mushrooms and dark leafy greens, is that you shouldn't just have spinach. You should have a variety of stuff. You shouldn't just have reishi. You should have a variety of stuff, and kind of cumulatively adds. But if we purely talk about stuff that is underrated, black pepper, super underrated. Like peppers in general, black pepper, what amazing thing.
And can I ask you, when you say black pepper, so I get the the peppercorns from the grocery store. I mean, is that kind of variety of pepper? Is there different varieties of it, or is that good enough to actually get those benefits?
Yes, there are many kinds, but I would say generally, like for the sake of simplicity, buy organic spices. Rotate them every 3 months. They spoil, even though it doesn't seem like they spoil, but if they're not as fresh, definitely helps. And if you get the peppers and you grind them yourself, they stay fresh a little longer. So, but there's different colors, slightly different benefits. Black tends to be a food that has a lot of longevity benefits. So black olives, black sesame seeds, chaga, coffee, cacao, the black color pigments tend to be really good for longevity purposes. But again, variety is beneficial, but black pepper is super underrated.
Okay.
Cinnamon, that's also good because some people don't like spicy, but cinnamon has that little sweetness and roundness, especially if you combine it with another beverage and add a little fats, tends to be like really nice rounding up. Turmeric and ginger are things that, you should definitely have in your arsenal. And cardamom, I think cardamom is underrated as well. Black pepper, cardamom. I feel like cinnamon, turmeric, ginger have now gotten a lot of attention, which they deserve. But cardamom but there's so many cloves and there's so many different kind of good spices.
Cloves are great.
That you can just start anise. Like there's so many stuff you could add. But yeah, let's say black pepper, cinnamon, turmeric, for example.
Yeah.
And like you said, the synergy there, like the black pepper increases your absorption of turmeric, which then helps with inflammation. So they're very synergistic, and kind of knowing some of those combinations are helpful as well.
Yeah, I think that piperin to turmeric combo is one of the better knowns, but I think there's many, many other benefits of absorption boosting properties. So for example, I guess chai is tea, but still let's call it chai spices for the sake of Americanization of it. Those chai spices are very synergistic. There's a lot of goodness in those combinations. I don't think it's by coincidence. I think it's 4,000 years of optimizing ideal spice blends. So I think there's something there.
My mom gives me a bottle of that every month because I put in my coffee every month, chai spices that she hand grinds herself and gives me a bottle. And it's incredible. Like my inflammatory levels are always, my HSCRP is always 0.
Yeah.
I really attribute a lot of that to the chai spices.
And I love that she makes them fresh and you keep rotating. A lot of people keep the same cinnamon jar for 2 years. No bueno. So, and they're not expensive. It's not a budget thing. Just
not exactly.
Kind of,
Yeah, that's fantastic. So let's go back to like your upbringing a little bit. What brought you to LA, first of all, and how did that transition happen?
Yeah, better weather, I guess. I moved here from New York, and I've also lived in, I guess, 9 other countries. And so I've gone all over. The reason why I came here, honestly, was just the mission. My goal was to, expand health, take it to the next health as well in my own different way. And this is the ground zero. This is the lead domino. And if your dream is to get the whole world drinking mushrooms, that's a pretty radical idea, and you have to start somewhere. And I felt this is the place where you start.
Right.
And not only this is the place, the US is definitely a place that uses a lot of pharmaceuticals. There's a lot of illnesses. It's a big consumer market. There's a lot of reasons why we're focused on the US first on a global scale. And then if you look at the markets in the US, I felt LA was the most important. Plus, I like the nature here. Yeah. Even though there's a lot of traffic and other negatives, as you well know, and there's so many positives, and the community is really what has kept me here. I thought I would come here for a year or two. Now I've been here 4 years. And what's kept me here really is the community of like-minded people that is pretty amazing here.
Right, because I found it interesting you came from Finland, and like a lot of the biohackers that I know are from Finland. It's like a biohacking paradise over there.
I remember probably, so besides me, there's like a couple other guys, Jaakko and Olli, who were like the original, this 10 plus years ago. And it was like, I remember Jaakko's first lecture was to my sports club, and we had like 6 people turn up in a back room of a gas station. So it's gone a long way from there. But now
the OGs of biohacking.
Yeah, there's
in Finland.
The guys, that same guy helped write the Biohackers Handbook or Guidebook that just came out a few weeks ago. The Oura Ring guys, if you know the Oura Ring, those are from Finland. Human Charger, that's from Finland. Obviously, Four Sigmatic. So there's a good community there for a small place, but there's in Netherlands, there's a good community, Sweden, London, obviously the US, you have a couple of different hubs. So I still think US is the number one combined, but considering how small Finland it is, it's pretty...
Per capita, I feel like you guys are taking the lead.
Per capita. It's easy to win per capita races. Right. But we don't have anything like this, like next health, that doesn't really exist. So maybe one day.
Yeah.
It's on our roadmap.
2052.
Awesome. Go ahead.
So what, with the spices and with drinking Four Sigmatic, I mean, how much do you feel in general quantity-wise that people need to consume per day? Like, do you feel that if someone takes a packet of Four Sigmatic per day, is that hitting that quota, or what level? I know it's obviously there's so much more than that. It's a healthy lifestyle, it's diet, it's exercise, it's everything, but how much of an impact is it going to have, and how much do people need to incorporate into their lives to really move the needle? Sure.
So I'll approach that from 2 angles. First, just kind of very ultra tactical. Most mushroom products back in the day used to have 2 to 5% of beta-glucans. Right now, the top products like ours are like 30 to 50% beta-glucan. So that's a huge quality difference. Used to be only hot water extracted products on the market. Now there's dual extracted products on the market like ours. Serving size was like 100, 200, 300 milligrams. Ours is between 500 to 1,500 milligrams per serving, just on a 1 serving. and then some people have more. So just in the last few years, the quality, transparency of mushroom products have radically increased. And I think that like 500 milligrams of a high quality extract is plenty for a person. That being said, they are tonic, which means you could have 2, 3, that's possible depending on what product and who's involved. So yes, I think 1 packet is enough, but there's no harm in increasing dosage. Again, it comes down how sensitive you are, how's your digestive system. There's so many factors involved. And the other angle to say is like, even though maybe it's better to have 2 or 3 packets versus 1 packet, the real thing is consistency, as you know. It's like that's compliance. And so rather have 1 a day on a consistent basis, maybe rotate up 2 or 3 products to have slightly different polysaccharides, slightly different beta-declugens. That's huge. So compliance is more important than just using a huge amount in a short time. But
Got it.
Yeah.
And what are some of the benefits of the mushrooms, of Four Sigmatic coffee? Can you run through some of them physiologically, biochemically?
Sure. Yeah. So just take all these functional mushrooms in whole. Right. So there's some micronutrients, B vitamins, certain key minerals, vitamin D that you can find, especially in a non-animal based source. Vitamin D is pretty impressive. Right. But the real magic sauce tends to be in these type of polysaccharides or beta-declugens. And what almost all of these functional mushrooms are good for is gut health and immunity. And they're immunomodulatory, so they're not immunostimulative and they're not immunosuppressive. They have this ability, especially these 1.3, 1.6 beta-declugens that tends to modulate the immune system. And it's kind of like driving on the 405 highway and putting your car cruise control on 60. And if there's an uphill, it's going to speed you up so you stay at 60. If there's a downhill to the valley, it's going to slow you down and keep you at 60. So that's kind of what they tend to do. Then specific mushrooms have specific other benefits. So our most popular mushroom coffee has chaga and lion's mane mushrooms. Chaga is known as a very high source of antioxidants, probably the highest source for SOD, superoxidase dismutase, and highest source of melanin being good for the skin. So used for a lot for gut, the skin support, and that's why it's good for it. In Finland, the Finnish people drink more coffee than anybody else in the world. And during the Second World War, when we were attacked both by the Germans and the Russians, we ran out of coffee beans and people were like, what do we do now? We don't have any coffee. Yeah. And we drank chaga and used this like coffee substitute. And after the Second World War, the University of Helsinki started studying the benefits of chaga and realized all these amazing antioxidant properties, for example. And so chaga is very high in minerals, and that tends to lower like non-radioactive cesium and other things like that. And that tends to lower the beverage to be more alkaline. So a lot of people drink coffee and they tend to have like heartburn and digestive challenges. So by lowering the pH while still maintaining a delicious flavor, chaga can be a great way to make coffee a little more easy to digest, not have those heartburn feelings. And lion's mane is known as a kind of a smart mushroom, a nootropic, if you may. It has a compound that is able to penetrate the blood-brain barrier and showing potential ways to improve and help rebuild nerve growth factors. So it's used for a lot for like thinking support. And so coffee, honestly, a lot of people use coffee for energy and productivity. And by adding some of these natural substances with it, you can further enhance the ability to stay focused and thinking smarter. So
we all need that.
Yeah, I think so.
I love it.
And to touch back on the psychedelic component, because I know that's a lot of people who are just fascinating with that topic. There's been a lot of studies and conversations about the medicinal benefits of it. You know, certain places use it for therapy, for PTSD, and a variety of different things. I mean, what's your opinion on it? I mean, what do you think the uses of that are and the benefits of that?
Well, first of all, I think there isn't that many studies yet, although that might seem so because the few studies that are out there from really credible universities like NYU, Johns Hopkins. And they've been coming out a lot and they've been getting a lot of press. But you know, as a medical professional, how many hundreds of research papers are done all the time, and just happens that few of them are like psychedelic mushroom related, and they got a lot of press. So that's why more people know of them. But I think a lot more research is needed. What we know about psychedelic mushrooms, psilocybin included, is that indigenous culture's been using them for a really long time. Doesn't mean that what cavemen did, we should do as well, but it shows that they're part of our heritage. So far, the lethal dose 50 is about 17 kilos of psilocybin mushrooms. Most people take 1 gram, which is 1,000 part of a kilo. So that's like really hard to overdose, pretty much impossible. I don't know any death cases so far. It's non-addictive. You build tolerance to it, so you can't take it 2 days in a row, really. So that kind of defeats the purpose of a lot of the microdosing trends right now. So you kind of have to cycle it in. So I see how it could be possible that in the next 3 to 5 years, that would be legalized, starting with certain states, maybe California, Oregon, and slowly but surely maybe it'll become a federal thing. But currently it's very legal. You know, Four Sigmatic is nowhere involved in that, but there's a lot more interest. I've been lecturing for years, and the amount of questions I get now from it is radically increased. And I think the few studies that there are out there look very positive. And I think more funding and support will be given to it. And I'm just happy that it's not a taboo anymore. Whatever the thing is, I don't think it helps anybody to not have that conversation, whatever your take is. So I just like that we're having an open conversation about it. And then as a society, by sheer voting, eventually people will decide. That's what democracy is, what we want. And I love that there's more research to help us learn more about the effects of it. But I definitely don't like the fact that all drugs are often treated equally, and I think there's big differences. And I love that we're now approaching with legalization of marijuana. It's just like understanding is that there are levels to everything.
Right, absolutely.
But the initial limited research looks very promising, very promising. But that being said, it's still pretty thin.
Got it. And what causes the actual psychedelic effects? Like you eat this mushroom, and then all of a sudden things happen. What chemically is happening in the body to make your brain respond like that?
Well, that's a fascinating thing. I'm sure you could probably talk to it more, but we've known a long time about our organs, like let's say liver and how liver works. We've understand quite well about blood circulation, muscles, but things like the nervous system and the brain is still quite uncharted territory. And because we've not been, because of political reasons, studying psilocybin, we know very little. We know that there are certain serotonin receptors that get activated. So there's a lot of sense of happiness and peace and comfort. We also know that completely different nerval connections happen under this influence of psilocybin versus non. I believe the original studies are from Italy, where you look at like this complete neuroplasticity happening under the influence during those hours. So we know that different parts of the brain get activated during psilocybin. But how does it actually work? There are theories, but general consensus is we don't yet know. And what they found out in the Johns Hopkins study is like, it's very hard to quantify that. So they ask questions like,
because everyone sees something different.
Yes. Right. So like, you try to quantify mystical experience. It's pretty hard, right? Yeah. So they have done, I believe Italy was the original study, but they scan the brain during and not, and they see completely different brain activity. But we know so little, and it's so hard to quantify. But the changes seem to be pretty permanent, like at least long lasting, like over a year. And this neuroplasticity seemed to happen, and sense of happiness and joyfulness happen. A lot of the studies, like you said, was for people with depression or terminal illness or something like that, that seems to help with that. So something there. And
it's a fascinating topic. I mean, it's just so interesting to think about something that literally changes your mind and the way you see things. It'd be interesting to see when we get to that point of actually understanding that.
Right. And what's the whole thought process behind microdosing it? Because that's a big term that's thrown around now a lot with psilocybin, LSD, all of it. What is that about?
Well, microdosing would be a small enough dose that you wouldn't have psychoactive effects.
Like a less than a milligram, or?
Depends on the person. Let's say for mushrooms, again, it's a natural product. So psilocybin cubensis is different than psilocybin mexicana. But let's say under 200 milligrams. But that's just not here or there. Let's say 1/10 of a normal dose.
Okay.
So what the assumption is that you will not have psychoactive properties. So you could go to work, you You could take care of your kids. You could drive a car. Again, these are very illegal substances. No way I'm promoting that. But you still have that neuroplasticity happening on a regular basis. So you would have some sort of triggering. A lot of people anecdotally report under psilocybin a higher awareness. Pupils get dilated. You smell better. You hear better. Your senses are heightened. And people are looking for that alertness. The problem with that is when something that is illegal becomes very popular very quickly, some of the information is not as clear. And I think I mentioned this tolerance that you build with psilocybin. A lot of people take microdose every day, and just based on the current research that we know, science of it, makes no sense. So,
because you get the tolerance, like you were saying.
Correct. If you would microdose maybe twice a week.
Right.
And then keep breaks. So at least keep a day or two in between if you would to do that, not every day. That being said, we know very little, and who knows, but historically mushrooms are used for more as a macro dose versus a microdose. But microdose of LSD or mushrooms, the point is that you'll have no visuals, but you will still have some predominantly cognitive supporting benefits, maybe recording happiness if you're constantly like depressed and down. Maybe that's another way.
Right. Very hard to quantify, again, one of those things.
Super
and how
hard,
do you quantify that?
especially if the definition is that you will not notice them.
Right.
So pretty much the definition of a microdose is that you will not feel it. So then how do you know what you're going to feel?
How do you know what's happening? Right. But, there is quantification and studies and rating systems for depression.
Yes.
And if this was a natural treatment for depression versus, all the thousands of pharmaceuticals out there that people take nowadays, how incredible would that be?
Again, you're the doctor. I'm not. I can't really comment on that. But I think based on just my own experience, a lot more people are asking for it, and we live in a democracy. So I think that in the next few years, people are just going to rally around to get more research on this. I think that's fair to ask anyway. It's like, hey, let's not decide what are we going to do with it, but let's just look into it more because it seems promising and people are interested. And I think that's what's going to happen in the next year or two is like more research is going to come out on a very rapid basis. Yeah. And there are organizations like MAPS that have dedicated themselves to mostly psilocybin and MDMA and a little bit of LSD as well, but yeah. Right.
I think the stigma is being lifted, like you said, with the marijuana legalization on studying some of these natural substances and how they affect us, and especially MDMA.
But I think the major lesson of this is people who are, let's say, skeptic about natural substances and don't think they work is how a little tiny piece of something can change your world upside down for multiple hours. Something that grows on cow dung, little thing sticking out, take a little piece and your life goes upside down. Don't you that makes you kind of marvel around Mother Nature and biology and science. It's like, how is it possible that little piece growing out of cow shit can put your world upside down?
Changes your reality. And
completely. And how amazing is this brain of ours and this meat vessel that we carry around every day?
So true.
Or let's take a smaller example. You go to cryo, few minutes, and your mind physiology and reality changes. Right. How cold therapy of any sort. I'm from Finland. We go to the frozen ocean and whatnot. How just, let's say, 15 to 30 seconds of that changes your reality like that.
All right.
Isn't that gives a lot of hope and perspective on how we can change our physiology with the right tools at the right time like that. And I think that's kind of what you guys are doing here as well, showing some of those 80-20 principle rules as well. It's like, hey, let's do an IV and see how you feel, your hangover or whatever, traveling, sick, how a small thing, and in this case, like a little baby thing, completely changes your world. So it begs the question, what else is out there that can do that for you in nature?
And I'm a firm believer that every disease that we have in the world, there's also a cure for it. I just think it's a matter of time until we find that cure.
Well, I think I met this cancer researcher in Caen in south of France, and it was funny is he was saying, so roughly, depending on the country and region, roughly 1 in 2 people will have a cancer in their lifetime. I just found out a couple months ago that my father has cancer, and it's sad, but then again, it's pretty common. So he's 70 and all that stuff. So, but what he said is that 100% of people will have cancerous cells in their body but just half of people roughly will have a strong enough immune system to fight it.
Wow.
I don't know if it's true or not. He's the expert, I'm not. But let's assume for a moment that that's true. Every person in the world will have cancerous cells in their body. Some will just have the immune system to fight it and not. And right now my father doesn't. But hey, what's happening is just keeps eyes open is like, what are you doing right now? What's your lifestyle? How are you, preventing hopefully some of these things from happening or mitigating the risk that you have in your genome and of catching a certain challenge in life.
Yeah, you talk about cancer, like, one of the biggest, newest therapies in cancer is directing your own immune system to fight that cancer.
Yes.
By using monoclonal antibodies. The cure is already within us. We just have to direct it correctly.
Well, by definition, cancer only happens when you have a passive immune response,
right.
When your natural killer cells are down and those macrophages are not fighting it. That's literally what happens. Is like your body security officers takes a vacations and goes to Caribbean and your house is less unprotected and the intruders come in and this time they get in and build a house there,
Yeah. So let's talk about you a little bit again.
Sure, yeah.
You come from like the mecca of biohacking. Like a lot of the studies on the sauna too were done in Finland,
Sure.
actually. So I want to know, what do you incorporate into your life in this world of health and optimization and biohacking?
Sure. Again, it's like my diet. A lot of people ask it. I refuse to answer it because what works for me might not work for you.
Right.
And I kind of encourage you to find it by an individual thing. And also you as busy people know that when you open a new location of Next Health, it's crunch time.
Yeah.
Your requirements are different than versus when maybe you have Thanksgiving and you have some time off with your family. So we have this seasonality between us individuals, but also within our own life, there's seasonal changes. So what I try to rather encourage is certain themes. One of the themes is being in the elements, cold, hot, going in high altitude, being by the ocean. So breathing in ocean air, being high in the mountains with less oxygen, being in super cold temperatures. I was just in Finland and it was minus 39 degrees. And then I was in Hawaii and it was like 90. And just having that exposure is like, what is that? Hormetic stressor,
Yes. Right.
So being in elements of any sort, mud, for like, that's great. So I highly recommend that. The other thing on nutrition is obviously, I mentioned a lot of different varieties. So not just having one type of healthy kale and spinach, but having a huge variety of different things. Most people eat very small amount of varieties in a year. And just with herbalism and variety and seasonal eating, you can probably 10x the amount that most average person eats pretty easily. And instead of fighting, should I eat high carbs, low carbs, animals, no animals, maybe you do all of it in different parts of the year. So in a lot of societies, fasting was a few times a year. You would do a more heavy fast, be it Islam, Ramadan, or maybe in Christianity, or actually originally pagan traditions of carnival, where there would be a fast and that cleanses the system. In Finland, you eat a lot of dandelion in spring. It's the first thing to come out. That cleanses the liver. There's very little food in the winter, so you eat a lot of fermented foods and meats and heavy fat, heavy stuff. And in the summer, you keep super light, and fall, you have a lot of berries. And maybe there's a seasonal time when you go high carb as well. So whatever that is for you, I recommend like seasonal eating that meets the objectives of your life. So if you're busy, you eat differently than if you're more relaxing and recharging. So that's something I highly recommend: seasonal eating, herbalism, being in elements. And then I hope people would have curiosity to try new stuff. I do a lot of stuff for biohacking, and most of it I honestly can wholeheartedly recommend. But every now and then when I try 10 new things, I find one thing that is the bomb. And that goes into my forever ritual, right? So, but you don't know if you don't know.
Right.
So there's now awesome light therapy. You guys have infrared. There's a lot of stuff. And if instead of having the stress of health, just this childlike curiosity to try new stuff, even if it's a little dorky at first or odd, just give it a go. Try it a few times. See how you feel. Maybe it doesn't really do anything for you, but hey, you tried. And then maybe every now and then you find something that really moves the needle, and hey, that was worth it. So curiosity in health is definitely something I recommend. And especially on things where there's little to no downsides. Like, there isn't much that can go wrong. So the risk is like, hey, you lose like $100 on a treatment of some sort. It's a very, for most of us, obviously, not everybody's as fortunate. For most of us, that's not that big of a deal.
That's a great philosophy. I love that. I love the seasonality, not just like within a day, but also within seasons of your life and seasons of the year. We all follow these circadian rhythms, and eating with a rhythm and like all the things you're talking about makes a lot of sense to me. Very cool. Yeah.
And again, your seasons might be different than your seasons, and finding that, especially in LA, there's really this weather is more or less quite similar year round. Finland is pretty radical, but finding those seasons of life and figuring how to incorporate them, and also changing everything, not just your diet, but your hydration. If it's really hot, you probably need to hydrate differently, or your exercise. If you're already super, super, super stressed, might not be the best time to go full on with exercise as well. And finding the seasonality in exercise and movement as well.
Right. That's been one of my big breakthroughs lately. Is I used to be so adamant that I had to go to the gym, 5-6 days a week, no matter what was going on in my life. And the more stress I had, that means the more I had to work out. And then you realize that it's actually, you're just crushing your body and your cells on a molecular level when you're going doing intense workouts, but mentally you're just totally burnt out and stressed. So I think that came along with the maturity and meditation and all the other elements that I've been bringing, family and community. But, all that stuff has such a big impact. And it's just, it's nice to break through to that. And I love that philosophy as well, your philosophies in general, because I do think that we know it's not one size fits all. And so many people do subscribe dogmatically to just one diet or one concept or one fad, but it's every human being is different. Everyone's going to respond differently.
Sure.
And I think our bodies are also programmed differently, based on our genes, based on our geography, where we live, where our ancestors are from. So, I'm a big believer of that as well.
And for example, your baseline test is like, everybody's on a bell curve. From science, a lot of recommendations of how much certain micronutrients you should take is done for majority of the population, not for all of the population. It's done from the eyes of how much calcium we need to prevent osteoporosis or a major illness or some sort. So your absorption might be somewhere in the bell curve. Some people absorb really poorly. Some people absorb incredibly well. And it might differ from different things. Like your absorption for iron might be higher or lower than the average. But also for B vitamins, it might be different, higher or lower. So that's why I really beg on testing. I get my blood work done every about 6 weeks, and that might be an overkill. Wow. But having, let's say, 2 to 4 times a year a checkup as part of your regimen, if that's any way financially possible for you, is huge, because a lot of what we do is also kind of second guessing. And I wouldn't recommend anybody to get obsessed with different biomarkers and Oura rings and checking your stuff, but having the fundamentals checked every now and then gives you a lot of knowledge on also how things are working for you when you experiment those new things.
Right. And that's what we do here at Next Health. All of our members, every membership you get comes with Next Health baseline testing as well. So we really build that into the culture of what we do here. And speaking of that, I think it's time to get you an IV before the talk. We're going to get you hooked up and get you fueled with all the vitamins, minerals, amino acids.
Yeah, and actually I believe what I'm getting today is the super immune. And it's also a great example. A couple of days, I'm going to fly to New Zealand, then fly to New York, then fly to China.
Wow.
So let's assume that the recommended daily needs of vitamin C or some water-soluble compound, it just might be different if you sit 12 to 16 hours in an airplane. And so it's just good to know that even within our lifestyle, those recommended daily needs differ a lot if you travel. Just as one example, stress, you mentioned one, high exercise, but you're about to hop on an airplane as well. Very different needs as human beings when our physiologies change into a little little metal plane with high pressure and whatnot. So,
right.
I mean, travel is a great example of when absolutely you have to know differently what your body needs.
Right. And travel creates a lot of stress, which creates a lot of inflammation, all of that. So you're absolutely right. Well, this was an amazing amount of knowledge that we got from you. Thank you so much for doing this. Where can people find you? Instagram or website? Or
I'm really bad with social media. Yeah. I mostly post bad nature pics taken on my iPhone. So I'm not on Facebook or those, but Instagram I am at Tero, Tero. And the best way to follow is I put a lot of educational content through Four Sigmatic. So FOURSIGMATIC on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. I have a couple books out there as well if you want to check them out. One is Healing Mushrooms. It's pretty affordable, usually about $10 on Amazon. It kind of covers the top 10 mushrooms in the world and how to cook with them. So there's plenty of content, but I recommend Four Sigmatic for educational content from me and my team is probably the most useful. My bad Instagram photos probably don't interest as many people.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate this mission that you're on, and keep going. We're big supporters of yours.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Cool.